Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Napoleon in Italy, The Little Corporal by Epic History TV. I am very excited to watch this. It is the beginning of a new Epic History TV series on Napoleon in Italy. I know that I and many of you have loved Epic History TV's videos on Napoleon, so I'm very excited to embark upon this journey, and I hope that all of you guys stick around to watch these videos along with me. Anyway, this is a very interesting topic. Italy is really where Napoleon made a name for himself. Now, he had already been rising through the ranks. You have the Siege of Toulon, when Napoleon defended the government from royalist rebels. So he was already known a bit, but Italy is when he became a star. And that's what we're going to see in this series. I'm very excited to watch this video. If you guys end up enjoying this one, I would really appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon or channel memberships for exclusive content. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
An Epic History TV PMF Productions collaboration.
PMF Productions, some of you guys have recommended them to me.
In 1796, at the height of the French Revolutionary Wars, a young French general took charge of a ragged, demoralized army in northern Italy.
Oh yeah, this was a real test of skill. Napoleon did not have the manpower or resources that he needed, and yet he still managed to achieve. And I mean, look, we're going to see that. I don't want to get into it yet, but this is going to be an impressive series of accomplishments from Napoleon.
It was his first command. Many expected him to fail. Instead, in just 1 month, he won his first brilliant campaign. With astonishing self-confidence, boldness, and energy, he led his army to victory after victory, transforming the war in Europe.
He leaped onto the scene. I mean, the war was already going decently well for France, but Napoleon pushed it in an entirely different direction. He exploded into the war and made a massive impact from the get-go.
Winning praise from a grateful republic and forging a legend.
Yep.
This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte's first campaign.
Oh man,
and
I'm
the
excited.
Dawn of a new age.
Part 1, The Little Corporal.
1792. Europe is plunged into conflict by revolution in France. At first, it seems this infant republic will be quickly snuffed out by...
Yeah, well, you know, a little bit of background. Of course, France has its revolution. It gets increasingly radical as the years go on. They're going to end up murdering their king. All of this is very threatening to the monarchies that surround them, right? Because this is sort of a bold new experiment in Republican government. The United States has done something similar, but of course they're on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. It's a lot more threatening now that it's in Europe. And so we have this situation where France is threatened by all of its neighbors, and France itself also wants to go on the attack to spread its Republican ideology, and this leads to massive warfare.
her neighbors. Incredibly, France clings on, thanks to mass mobilization, patriotic fervor, and her traditional military power.
Yeah, we have something called the levée en masse, which is sort of an early conscription. Conscription was not common during this time period, and the French Republican government really brought that about, and they mobilized the entire population in this sort of nationalistic, patriotic push to help France survive. This was a very novel idea. You know, a lot of armies were still organized around the idea of sort of gathering up the dregs of society and forcing them to serve in the military with this aristocratic officer corps. France is trying to do something new. It wants an army of citizen soldiers, sort of based on the old Roman idea. And they find a lot of success early on. And I mean, the success is that they remarkably managed to survive at all.
In 1795, France occupies the Low Countries, while Prussia and Spain withdraw from the war. But the French Republic still faces a powerful coalition of enemies, which includes the Austrian Empire and kingdoms of Piedmont, Sardinia, Naples, and Great Britain,
Yep.
as well as a counter-revolutionary revolt in the Vendée region of western France. In Paris, the most extreme revolutionaries had been toppled, sent to the guillotine.
Yeah, I mean, we have this, reign of terror, as it's called, this era of radicalism led by a political faction called the Jacobins, who were led by Robespierre. There were a lot of executions of right-wingers, executions of moderates. Everybody was suspected of one thing or another. Eventually, Robespierre himself is executed. There's kind of a terror in the other direction, what is called the White Terror, as sort of conservatives and moderates go on the attack. But, the Age of Terror comes to an end, and France settles down a little bit. They will be in political chaos, basically until Napoleon becomes emperor. But it is at least less violent than the Reign of Terror.
As they had sent so many before them. France is now governed by the Directory, a more moderate 5-man committee, which quickly wins a reputation for corruption and inefficiency.
Yeah, it's more moderate than Robespierre, but clearly at this point we've strayed pretty far from the ideals of the revolution. The French sort of scale back on the democracy aspects. At one point, they were getting real democratic. They sort of pull back from that. The Directory is very corrupt. It is definitely not a voice for the people. It does not listen to the voice of the people. So it is certainly more moderate and stable than France under Robespierre, but it's also very disappointing to the people of France, particularly those who once believed in the revolution, believed in its ideas.
Nevertheless, in 1796, they plan a major military offensive to knock their most dangerous adversary, Austria, out of the war. The two main efforts will be made along the Rhine by powerful armies under General Jourdan and General Moreau. A third effort, of which much less is expected, will be made in northern Italy.
As you can see, and as they just pointed out, the offensive in Italy is supposed to be far less important than the other two offensives further north. It's sort of the third and least important of the three offensives. You put Napoleon in charge, and it quickly becomes far more important than it's supposed to be.
The French army of Italy is a poor cousin, starved of money and supplies, stripped of troops to reinforce French forces on the Rhine. But its fortunes are about to change.
Oh yeah.
On the 2nd of March, 1796, the Directory appoint a new commander to lead the army. One of France's youngest generals, Napoleon Bonaparte.
There he is.
We're delighted to welcome back as video sponsor, NapoleonSouvenirs.com.
Hey, there we go. You guys know the deal. Please go and check out this video by Epic History TV. Please go and show them some support. Leave a like on their video, comment, and particularly since this is a newly released video, please go and check out their sponsor. We want to show them all the support we can for making these fantastic videos. So hopefully we can get more fantastic videos in the future. So, thank you so much to Epic History TV, and please go and show them support, guys. Their video is linked in my description. Very true quote.
Napoleon arrives at the Army of Italy's headquarters in Nice on the 25th of March. He is just 26 years old. 2 years have passed since he masterminded French victory at the Siege of Toulon,
which we saw in Epic History TV's original series on Napoleon. This was really one of the first times when Napoleon made a name for himself militarily.
Since then, his fortunes have been mixed. A short spell as artillery commander in Italy, 10 days in jail when his political patrons fell from power. He then refused to serve in the Vendée, fighting French counter-revolutionaries, leading to several months' unemployment in Paris.
Yep.
Then, an extraordinary break. 13 Vendémiaire, Paris. A royalist mob threatens to storm the national government.
And we can sort of see how far we've come in the revolution by 1795, and that we have royalist rebels in the capital. I mean, that would have been basically unthinkable under the reign of Robespierre. Everything was so far to the left, so radical. Clearly, we have shifted far to the center, and even to the right at this point, that the government is under threat, not by left-wing radicals, but by right-wing radicals.
Napoleon is the closest general to hand, and put in charge of its defense.
I mean, look, this whole event, Napoleon's success is definitely partially dictated by his skill, him being a quick decision maker, but also he is in the right place at the right time. This is one of those historical events where you have a great man of history like Napoleon, and he gets extraordinarily lucky.
He disperses the crowds with brutal efficiency, and is acclaimed savior of the revolution.
There's the famous quote about how he dispersed the crowds with a whiff of grape shot, basically firing artillery into the crowds. Very brutal, but he did save the government.
A grateful Directory promotes Napoleon to General of Division and awards him command of the Army of Italy. On the 9th of March, he marries his great love, Joséphine de Beauharnais, and leaves for the front 2 days later.
And I don't know if they're going to show this, but upon Napoleon's arrival, there was a lot of skepticism from the military side of things about Napoleon's skill. And you can kind of see why. I mean, this is a man, you know, he was successful at the Siege of Toulon, but for years his career's been up and down. He's been more active politically than militarily, and he's only been appointed to this position because he saved the government. Napoleon is sort of seen as a political appointee. And if you're a tried and true military man, that doesn't inspire much confidence. So there's a lot of people who think, you know, this Napoleon guy, he doesn't have any real military skill. He's just talented in the political side of things. And a lot of people who are, you know, they're going to wait and see. They don't know. Of course, Napoleon proves them all wrong, but there is some skepticism upon him taking this position.
There are French generals in Italy with a better claim to command than Napoleon.
Yeah, exactly.
Serrurier, a professional soldier who first saw action in the 7 Years' War, a decade before Napoleon was born. Augereau, a tough, experienced soldier, bold tactician, and committed Republican. And Massena, risen from the ranks, fearless, tireless, hero of the Battle of Loarno against the Austrians the year before.
As we can see, there are a lot of men who are far more qualified for this position than Napoleon is. Napoleon is given this position as a thanks from the Directory, and so you can kind of see why a lot of people are skeptical initially. This is also sort of a good time to note, with the appearance of Massena, that in the campaign in Italy, we're going to see a lot of characters who will follow Napoleon all the way to the top. A lot of Napoleon's subordinates, a lot of Napoleon's marshals will first sort of enter into the story in Italy, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited for this series.
All three would later become marshals of Napoleon's empire.
Well, there you go. They said it for me.
For now, Napoleon seems to these veterans young and underqualified, a political appointment.
Yep.
Embarrassingly infatuated with his new wife.
Yeah, but he was a bit of a simp. He would have relationship troubles throughout the rest of his life, and, you know, they're saying exactly what I just said. He seems, and he is, very inexperienced. A political appointment, a lot of people are very skeptical.
But there is something about the Corsican. As Massena observed, his small size and puny face did not put him in their favor.
Damn.
But as soon as he donned his general's hat, he seemed to grow by 2 feet.
Now, look, Napoleon, he wasn't that small for the time period, but he wasn't big, and he could be awkward at times, but he was a charismatic leader, and he could inspire his men if he needed to.
Napoleon impresses above all with his tireless energy, and he has much to do. His army is organized into Massena's advance guard of 2 divisions, one led by a hard-fighting Swiss general La Harpe, and the other by Meunier, whom Napoleon soon decides is incompetent. The main body comprises the divisions of Augereau, Serrurier, and 2 smaller divisions under Macquart and Garnier. The cavalry is led by General Stengel. But the army of Italy has been shockingly neglected by the Directory. The men are hungry and unpaid, with a few units on the verge of mutiny.
Yeah.
Some men don't even have shoes or muskets.
I mean, this is no way to run an army. If your men don't have shoes, weapons, they're hungry. First off, they're probably not willing to fight for you. Second off, many of them can't even fight. And of course, this is particularly, this is a particular sign of hypocrisy, because the whole idea of this army is that it's a revolutionary army of citizen soldiers. That's how it started back in 1792, but, we've come a long way since then. We have the Directory now, and we've clearly come a long way from those sort of revolutionary ideals.
Napoleon inspects the troops and studies reports. He enforces discipline and breaks up rotten units. He is assisted by his aide-de-camp, Junot, Marmont, and a dashing cavalry colonel, Joachim Murat.
So we have some other very important characters who will follow Napoleon for a long time. These are some of the guys who were already around before this point. So once again, we're seeing Napoleon's marshals and his subordinates emerge before our very eyes.
As emperor, Napoleon will make 2 of these men dukes and 1 a king.
Yep.
His most valuable assistant is his new chief of staff, General Berthier, who helps him to reorganize the army's supply system and scour southern France for food, transport, and forage. The situation begins to improve. But Napoleon knows what will really rejuvenate his ragged divisions.
Victory.
Victory in battle, and the promise of plunder.
Very true. There you go. This is his effort to inspire them. And hey, Napoleon's a pretty inspiring guy, so I think his chances are pretty good, even though sort of all the odds at this point are stacked against him. He doesn't have the resources, he doesn't have the manpower, he doesn't have the supplies. His men at this point are not very motivated, the morale is low. There's a lot of things that would suggest that Napoleon is about to fall flat. But, we all know Napoleon, he's capable of much, much more than anybody would expect at this point.
Napoleon has spent 2 years studying the situation in northern Italy and the history of past wars here. He has developed clear plans on how the campaign must be fought. Now, he will put them into action.
Yep.
Napoleon, with 38,000 troops, outnumbers the Piedmontese and the Austrian army. But if they combine, he will be outnumbered. So he must prevent this at all costs. His plan bears all the hallmarks of what will become known as the Napoleonic art of war.
But yeah, we see this sort of stuff from Napoleon a lot down the line. I mean, he's one man. He is, at this point, just leading the army of Italy. Eventually, he will lead all of the French armies, but we will see many times throughout his career, he will be facing several pretty large forces of enemies that he has to fight. He has to prevent them from unifying. So what we're seeing right now is something we will see repeated many times throughout Napoleon's military career.
A bold, rapid advance, not against the expected target, Genoa, but Dago. Here he will occupy the central position and prize his enemies apart. He knows that when threatened, The Piedmontese will retreat on their capital Turin, the Austrians on Milan.
Well, even this is really revolutionary for the time period, and you might be asking, well, how exactly? The reason they expected him to advance on Genoa, that's sort of a strategic important position, and warfare of the last century, of the 1700s, I know we're still in the 1700s, but we're coming up on 1800. Warfare of the 1700s has largely been characterized by armies sort of moving around each other, taking strategic points, taking forts, taking cities. Napoleon is going to upheave all of this. He's going to change everything. Napoleon is far more concerned with going for opposing armies or forcing them to retreat or move in a particular direction. He's far more, his army is far more maneuverable than is typical. It's far more mobile, and that's what he's focused on. So already, even with his relatively limited military experience, Napoleon has these very revolutionary ideas that he did pick up from brilliant military minds. I mean, he didn't invent all of these. There were some progressive revolutionary military thinkers that Napoleon has learned from, and he's going to try and put these ideas into practice.
With his enemies divided, unable to support each other, he can defeat each in detail.
Yep.
Napoleon's plan will be aided by the fragility of the Austro-Piedmontese alliance. They regard each other with deep distrust after years of rivalry. The new Austrian commander, General Beaulieu, is experienced.
Also, not to mention, sure, the biggest threat right now is the French, but the Austrians are always trying to exert more and more influence over Italy, exert influence over Piedmont. So they're not really buddies. They've only been brought together in this alliance by a common enemy, the French. So their alliance is very shaky.
And was once considered energetic, but he is now 70 years old and does not know Italy. He is convinced the French will target Genoa, the port used by the British to supply their coalition allies. So much so that he rejects Piedmontese plans for close cooperation. Their troops remain scattered across mountain passes in a general defense against invasion.
And this is what I'm saying about Napoleon bringing these new revolutionary ideas into practice. Now, he's not the only one to do that. There are other talented officers in the French army. In fact, some of them are serving under Napoleon at this very moment. Of course, he's just the most famous person to do it because of the levels of success he will reach. But what he's up against these European armies, the Piedmontese, the Austrians, etc., who are led by these old-style aristocrats. The French army is disproportionately composed of sort of these young, energetic, middle-class men who were given opportunities by the revolution. It is far more a meritocracy at this point than any other European army. So you have forces like the Austrians who, because of their commanders, are slow, they're sort of based on old styles of tactics, they cannot keep up with somebody like Napoleon. And this is something we will see repeated until eventually the other armies of Europe just start to copy Napoleon and do what he's doing. And then they will start to improve their strategy.
On the 4th of April, Napoleon moves his headquarters forward to Albenga in preparation for his offensive. But Beaulieu strikes first. On the 10th of April, Austrian troops take Voltri to disrupt the expected French attack on Genoa. The small French garrison falls back to join Massena's advance guard at Savona. But Beaulieu's fixation with Genoa is playing into Napoleon's hands.
Yep.
Dago, with its vital crossroads that link the Piedmontese and Austrian armies, is covered by just 8,000 men of Argenteau's corps. Mountainous terrain means Beaulieu can only march to Argenteau's aid via Acqui, more than 20 miles to the north.
Uh-oh.
What's more, Argenteau has orders to take French positions at Montenotte as a diversion for the attack at Voltri.
As always, Napoleon knows and reads his opponent far better than they can read him.
But the French cling on courageously. Corporal Roache particularly distinguishes himself, exposing himself to enemy fire to shoot down on the enemy.
Damn.
His commander, Colonel Rampont, tells his men, "Here we must conquer or die."
Yep.
A moment which quickly enters French military folklore. It's the perfect set.
I mean, there's a lot of legends made during this campaign. I mean, this is exactly what you need. You need men who are committed to the cause, willing to conquer or die. That's good.
Set up for Napoleon. The enemy's attention is focused on Voltry, and Argenteau's corps has been left dangerously exposed. He swings into action, sending La Harpe's division to reinforce Rampont's troops, while Massena makes a tough night march across steep ravines in rain and fog to turn Argenteau's right flank. By dawn, the Austrians are outnumbered, outflanked, and under heavy attack.
Yep.
They retreat in disarray. Napoleon orders Massena to move on Dago, while he turns his attention to the Piedmontese. But Augereau's advance gets held up at Cosseria. The old castle is held by Piedmontese and Croatian grenadiers. The French launch frontal attacks into withering fire and suffer hundreds of casualties. When the colonel of the 18th Demi Brigade is killed, a 26-year-old Louis Gabriel Suchet takes over command.
Ah, another very important character. And I will say, you know, you certainly do want that attitude of conquer or die. You want that commitment to the cause. But one of the consequences of that is, or can be, very high casualty numbers. You have a situation like this where the French are pushing and pushing and pushing, refusing to give up. And I mean, that is what you need. That's what Napoleon needs for success. But it does result in very high casualties. I mean, we will see with Napoleon's strategy and the scale of the Napoleonic Wars, these large-scale, up until that point, sort of unimaginable casualties. A lot of death and destruction is to come, and part of that we can see in Napoleon's way of doing things. Part of it, not all of it, of course.
"I have never seen fire like it," wrote Marmont, Napoleon's aide-de-camp. Despite heroic resistance, the hopelessly outnumbered garrison surrenders the next day. With Serrurier's division also advancing from the south, Piedmontese commander General Colli has little choice but to abandon his position at Montezemolo. The same day, under Napoleon's watchful eye, Massena takes Dago. But while La Harpe's division moves off to reinforce Augereau, hungry French troops left in Dago turn to plunder and pillage. No one spots Colonel Vukasovic, a tough Croatian commander, approaching with 3,000 reinforcements.
Yeah, see, this is not yet the army of Napoleon, the Grande Armée. You know, Napoleon has done a lot to whip this army into shape, but he's still working with, you know, some men who are still probably under-disciplined, under-supplied, and so they get a big victory, they kind of go all out, they forget their discipline. You know, Napoleon's not working under perfect conditions, or at least not under conditions completely within his control, and so you get mistakes in situations like this.
He attacks at dawn, routing the French and retaking Dago with ease.
Not good.
It requires the recall of La Harpe's division and another day of heavy combat before Vukasovic can be driven out of Dago. A bayonet charge led by 27-year-old Colonel Lannes wins particular praise from General Bonaparte.
Another important character.
Napoleon has won 3 victories in 4 days. The marches and battles have been grueling, but he has achieved his first objective.
Yeah, and this was an extraordinary success. As you can see, a little sloppy in some ways, not as clean or professional as Napoleon would become in later years, but very much the hallmarks of Napoleon's strategy, the hallmarks of a Napoleonic success. We can see them all right here.
The Austrians are regrouping at Acqui and will soon retreat to Alessandria. They can offer no support to the Piedmontese.
Uh-oh.
And so General Colli orders another withdrawal to a strong defensive position behind the Corsalia River. Napoleon orders an immediate attack. Augereau's division on the right, Serrurier on the left, Massena in support. But the French, under heavy fire, struggle to cross the swollen river with its steep banks. When Serrurier's troops finally get into San Michele, they immediately begin looting the town and are thrown out by a counterattack.
Once again, we're seeing some of that sort of lack of discipline because, Napoleon has not had the time or the resources in order to sort of, get this army to the level of discipline that he will later be able to get his men to. Once again, he's working under sort of these not perfect conditions, but you gotta use what you have, right?
Despite his success, Colli is still heavily outnumbered and fears encirclement. The following evening, he begins a covert withdrawal to Mondovì. But Napoleon is not deceived by the fake campfires. Patrols confirm his suspicions. The Piedmontese are pulling back. Though his troops are exhausted, wet, and hungry, he launches them after the fleeing enemy.
I mean, hey, Napoleon has never been one to hold back. He's always been quick and decisive. That is extremely characteristic of Napoleon's strategy. In fact, Napoleon's worst moments are when he's not decisive, when he can't make a decision. So, this is what we like to see from Napoleon.
Colli's troops are caught before they can establish a new defensive line.
Oh.
The brave and popular General Dicat is killed.
Oh.
Retreat turns to rout. The French enter Mondovì in triumph, where at last, briefly, they can eat and rest.
This is very true. I mean, Napoleon took what was a planned retreat back to a stronghold. He took that and turned it into a complete rout. And he's already dealt with the Austrians. Well, not completely. They'll be coming back, but these are some pretty impressive victories for, Napoleon's first go at things.
General Colli, his defeated troops scattered and demoralized, requests an armistice. Napoleon declines as his troops descend from the mountains into the fertile plain of Piedmont.
Damn.
Destitute and starved, French soldiers now plunder the Italian countryside freely.
Yep.
Brigadier General Joubert is among those frustrated by the men's conduct.
I mean, I agree. I'd be frustrated as well. But it's not really unexpected. We've seen it before. They're undersupplied. This is exactly what you would expect. We see sort of similar behavior years later when Napoleon is emperor in Spain. And that's also a situation where, one, Napoleon isn't usually present, so it's not under his control. And two, the French soldiers are having a bad time, so they take to looting and plundering. Here, they're very, very victorious, but for such a long time, they've had low morale, they've been undersupplied, and so when they get a taste of victory, they're just going to go all out. Total disregard for discipline, and like we've mentioned, Napoleon really hasn't had the time or authority to impart the discipline that, he sort of needs his men to have, and that later he will make sure his armies have.
Everything would go very well if the soldiers did not abandon themselves to pillage. Not a day passes without some looters being shot. Despite this severity, the mania doesn't stop. The rural folk are arming themselves.
And, of course, as our friend here is alluding to, one of the issues that can arise if you're looting brutally or too much is that you risk a sort of guerrilla uprising. And that's very much what we saw in Spain. Now, the Spanish didn't want the French there at all, but I'm pretty sure that part of the Spanish guerrilla resistance was due to, bad French treatment of Spanish civilians. So if you treat the civilians too bad, you could take a population which is maybe neutral or maybe only slightly disdainful of you and turn them into an armed rebellion, which you don't want to do.
Napoleon condemns such behavior, but his orders have limited impact.
Yeah.
Especially as everyone knows Generals Massena and Augereau to be two of the greatest offenders.
That
On
doesn't
the
help.
25th of April, French troops enter Carrasco, just 30 miles south of the Piedmontese capital, Turin. Meanwhile, General Beaulieu is at long last marching to Piedmont's aid,
Jeez, finally.
but he is a week late. And when he learns that Piedmont has opened negotiations with the enemy, he withdraws his troops in disgust, planning to take up new positions along.
Just withdraws his troops in disgust. Hey man, if you were willing to work with the Piedmontese in the first place, this might not have happened. So, you can be as disgusted as you want, but as far as I'm concerned, at least part of this is your fault. Maybe the majority of this is your fault. You're the big brother in this relationship. Austria's far more powerful than Piedmont, and it seems that Piedmont was more aware of the risks than you were. You slow old man. So, this is your responsibility.
On the Po River. Austrian troops join in the plunder of Piedmontese villages as they go.
They can't get a break.
Victor Amadeus III, King of Piedmont Sardinia, sees no option but to accept Bonaparte's terms for an armistice. Piedmont must give up the strategic fortresses at Cuneo and either Alessandria or Tortona, leaving the country virtually defenseless.
Yeah, you've been routed by Napoleon, and now your allies, Austrian troops, are looting your countryside. If you're the Piedmontese, you really don't have any other way out. You could resist, but I think that resistance would likely be futile. You're probably best off surrendering.
The final peace treaty, signed 3 weeks later in Paris, cedes Nice and Savoie to France, and grants free passage to French armies.
Interesting.
Napoleon has ended the 4-year war with Piedmont in less than 3 weeks.
Damn. Always more to do with Napoleon.
The army of Italy has little time to rest on its laurels. 4 days later, having received 7,000 reinforcements and fresh supplies, it's on the move again. Napoleon plans to invade the rich province of Lombardy, ruled by the Emperor of Austria, and defeat Beaulieu's army. But first he must cross the Po River, which is closely watched by Austrian forces. It will prove one of Napoleon's most brilliant maneuvers. Massena is ordered to make conspicuous preparations to cross the river near Salé, assembling boats and building gun batteries. Meanwhile, Napoleon has formed a new elite brigade, 5,000 grenadiers, carabiniers, and chasseurs to act as the army's advance guard under the command of General d'Allemagne. This force is ordered to march rapidly east to Piacenza and cover 40 miles in just 36 hours.
Once again, and this is something I've said of Napoleon before, and also something I've said of men like Julius Caesar. When Napoleon is presented with the available options, you can do A, B, or C. He's the type of guy who says, you know what, I'm gonna do B. I'm making my own way. And this is one of the reasons why he, and men like him, Caesar for example, are so brilliant and so hard to predict for their enemies. We already talked about how Napoleon reads his enemies better than they can read him. This is one of the reasons he's all about trickery, subversion, taking the option that no one thinks he would take, or taking the option that he's just invented himself.
They are followed by La Harpe's division, then Augereau and the cavalry. Beaulieu receives reports that French troops are moving east and begins to redeploy his forces, while remaining conscious that there are still French troops that might cross the Po as far west as Valença.
True.
This uncertainty makes it impossible for him to concentrate his forces.
I mean, we've already seen in his old age, he may not be as talented as he once was, but to be fair, Beaulieu does have a legitimate reason to be cautious. The French could cross the river in multiple places, and he really doesn't want that to happen. So he does have to take cautious action to prevent that, though I think his caution is probably not going to help him in the end.
What's more, he's completely underestimated the scale and speed of Napoleon's move.
Oh no.
The French advance guard, with Colonel Lannes in the lead, crosses the Po on the 7th of May, chasing off Austrian patrols that are the only opposition. By the next morning, most of La Harpe's and Augereau's divisions and the cavalry are across, consolidating the French bridgehead, while Massena and Serrurier move to the crossing as fast as they can. Men of General Liebtei's division are the closest Austrian troops. They take up defensive positions at Fombio, but are overwhelmed by the French attack.
I will say, by the way, just a quick note, the artwork throughout this video is fantastic, and I think gives a really good look at the scale of these battles. And keep in mind, these battles are much, much, much smaller scale than some of the battles we're going to be seeing throughout the Napoleonic Wars, or that we did see throughout the Napoleonic Wars. But even these battles, you can look at this art, just the absolute waves of men crashing against each other, heading in every direction. I really like how this is depicted.
That evening, Beaulieu's advance guard arrives, expecting to reinforce Liebtei. Instead, they blunder into La Harpe's division.
Uh-oh.
In confused night fighting, General La Harpe is shot dead, possibly by friendly fire.
Damn.
Napoleon regards him as one of the army's best generals, and his loss a great blow.
And, we've seen, even already, so many of the figures that emerged in this campaign would go on to be so important down the line. They would go on to be marshals under Napoleon. So if La Harpe had survived, who knows how far he would have risen. We've already seen there have been a lot of casualties in this campaign. There's a lot of men who are extremely talented, maybe more talented than those men who would go on to become marshals, but they don't make it past the campaign in Italy. And unfortunately, that's just how it is, particularly when you have this aggressive strategy. You risk high casualties, and you risk casualties among your officer corps, because you need men who are willing to risk it all, get out in front, and lead by example. And that's great, but if you're doing that, you're, at an increased risk of being shot or being stabbed or killed in any way, right?
Beaulieu, realizing that the French have crossed the Po in force and now threaten to cut him off, orders a rapid withdrawal east. Milan is to be sacrificed. The great fortress of Mantua will be his next refuge. The French advance guard is soon in pursuit. On the morning of the 10th of May, they catch the Austrian rearguard.
Yeah, Napoleon does not want to let them go because I've had a lot of criticism of Beaulieu, but it was probably militarily the right decision to retreat far east and leave Milan. Now, symbolically, politically, that might be an unpopular decision. You're sacrificing such an important and populous city to the French, but militarily, this is probably your best chance of survival. And, Napoleon knows this. He does not want to let the Austrians escape.
At Lodi.
Now this is a famous battle. I have certainly heard of this one.
French troops chase the Austrians across town and over the town's 200-yard bridge over the River Adda. But when they try to follow, they find the bridge is swept by fire from 14 guns.
Wow.
Its far end is held by 3 battalions of Croatian infantry.
Okay.
Several more battalions and cavalry squadrons are behind them in reserve. around 6,500 men in total. Napoleon soon arrives and positions guns to bombard the Austrians on the far bank. An artillery duel rages for much of the afternoon.
And remember, Napoleon was an artillery commander, so this is kind of his expertise.
Napoleon sends Beaumont's cavalry brigade upstream to look for a ford so they can cross the river and flank the Austrian defenses.
This is probably the best course of action because the Austrians right now have a pretty damn strong position. I mean, they will be able to repel the French from crossing at almost any cost to the French. So the best thing to do is probably for Napoleon to find another way across the river to try and flank them and dislodge them from their position.
But he grows impatient. Massena's division has begun to arrive from the south, bringing his strength up to 15,000 men and 30 guns. Napoleon makes a speech to the infantry, taunting them, daring them to take the bridge, then orders them forward.
Okay, we'll see how this goes, but once again, sure, Napoleon has a lot more men than the Austrians do, but all the Austrians have to do is hold this bridge, and it's going to take a lot of French casualties to be able to take this bridge and cross it, so we'll see how this goes. I'm not sure this is the greatest idea Napoleon's ever had.
To cries of "Vive la République!" the hardened 2nd Carabinier Battalion leads the charge. They come under torrential fire from the Austrian guns.
Yep.
But urged on by Napoleon, Berthier, Massena, Lannes, and others, French infantry surge across, under, and around the bridge.
Wow.
Faced with this irresistible onslaught, the Austrian front line crumbles.
Incredible, hey. You know, who am I to give advice to Napoleon, right? He knows what he's doing. Now, I'm sure this did cost a lot of French lives. That's always the downside. But this strategy it's just a strategy of push forward as hard and as fast as possible. Sometimes this is the way to do it. It's not complicated, but it can be very effective. Now, would Napoleon have been better off waiting for his men to cross the river? Maybe. It probably would have cost less French lives. But also, you have to remember, Napoleon's under a time crunch. He's trying to capture or defeat the Austrians as they escape to the east. So he wants to do this as quickly as possible. So you can kind of see why he decided to take this course of action.
And with French cavalry across the river to the north, the rest of the Austrian rearguard begins an orderly withdrawal.
Okay, well, actually, of course, 500's still a lot of casualties, but not nearly as many as the Austrians. The Austrians have 4 times as many casualties as the French. It's a pretty remarkable French victory right there. Yeah, well, Napoleon was certainly not known for having a small ego. Of course, many of the quote-unquote great men throughout history had massive egos, and I guess for good reason. When you're that powerful, we can see that this idea that Napoleon has of himself has already started to develop. And he certainly had some impressive victories, but his victories are not impressive enough to call him, a decider of the fate of peoples. He's a little ahead of the curve, but as we know, he is correct in the long run.
5 days after his victory at Lodi, Napoleon leads his army into the city of Milan. They are welcomed by cheering crowds. Though in reality, Italians are deeply divided in their attitudes towards the French.
I was going to say, they're met with cheering crowds, but, like they said, the Italians are very divided. We're sort of coming upon this new age of nationalism in Europe. We're at the beginning stages, and so there's begun to be some unrest amongst, some of the liberal elites, some of the liberal, more revolutionary types in Italy, there's been, they don't like that Austria has so much influence because they're beginning to develop this feeling that they're Italian and all Italians are in it together, this feeling of national identity. And of course, the Austrians are sort of standing in the way of that. Also, some of these liberal Italians are fans of the French Revolution. They're fans of the ideas and the ideals France is putting out there. So there's that. But of course, some others, they may not like the Austrians, but they also may not like the French. I mean, the French are another foreign occupier. And a lot of people, they saw how far and how radical the French Revolution got, and they really don't like that. That frightens them, right? So you very much have a split, a spectrum, honestly. Some people are very pro-French, some people are very anti-French, some people are sort of anywhere along that spectrum in the middle. You have people a lot of people are very anti-Austrian, but some people who were, I guess you could say, sort of collaborators with the Austrian regime are more pro-Austrian. So it's a very complicated picture.
After Lodi, French soldiers have a new nickname for their general. Le Petit Caporal.
Yeah.
The Little Corporal.
Little Corporal.
It's a term of affection because he gets his hands dirty.
Yeah, there's been a sort of misconception. It's tied in with the misconception that Napoleon was particularly short for the time period. Now, Napoleon would be short if he was around today, but during the time he was alive, he wasn't that short. He was pretty average. And the nickname, the Little Corporal, doesn't really help that picture. But Little Corporal, it's more an endearing nickname. It means more like our corporal, right? That's what it's supposed to indicate in French. It doesn't mean like the small corporal, as we sort of read it in English.
Even aiming the guns himself.
Yeah.
The job of an artillery corporal.
That was his expertise.
In just a month, Napoleon has transformed a war-weary, disheveled and demoralized army into a victorious fighting force.
Pretty good.
Brimming with esprit de corps and eager for further conquests.
Yeah.
While he, in his first campaign, has demonstrated extraordinary energy, mastery of detail, brilliant military intuition. Above all, indomitable self-belief.
As always.
It is this quality that inspires his soldiers to risk their lives for glory, for the Republic, and for the man they will one day acclaim their emperor.
Yeah.
A big thank you to PMF Productions for...
Yeah, shout out PMF Productions. As I said, some of you guys have recommended them to me. Yeah, I mean, Epic History TV is always able to get me hyped up about any historical topic, but especially about Napoleon. I love to see the return of Napoleonic videos. They've got their classic music playing in the background. I will certainly follow this series as it is released. I'm not sure how many episodes they are planning, but I will react to all of them. I think this is a really fascinating topic. We're seeing the beginnings, sort of Napoleon's career. We talked about earlier in this video what came before the campaign in Italy, but this is when Napoleon really made a name for himself, and we can see a lot of the Napoleonic staples emerging, a lot of familiar characters emerging. So this is really an interesting period to study. I'm excited to watch the rest of this series. I'm excited to learn more about Napoleon. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you would leave a like, leave a comment, check out the Patreon and channel memberships for exclusive reaction content. Anyway, I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.